Well, Chris, thank you very much for hosting me this evening, and I want to thank everybody in the audience for attending. With that said, I'm going to get started. My presentation today is called Cosmic Abandonment, an explanatory synthesis regarding human origins, psychopathy, slavery, and the current psychological and social conditions of humanity. I want to point out here this term, an explanatory synthesis. Okay? We're not talking about absolute proof here. There will be some conjecture, all right? We're talking about a synthesis of information that brought together explains, is an active framework or model for the current human condition. That's what this presentation is intended as. I would like to respectfully dedicate this presentation to the memory of Lloyd Pye. If anybody is not familiar with this gentleman, you need to be. Okay? His work is invaluable, and unfortunately, the truth community has lost this truth warrior this week. He passed away this week from cancer. So again, I'd like to respectfully dedicate this presentation to the memory of Lloyd Pye. I'll start with a quote from Aristotle, the philosopher. He said, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." And with that in mind, I'd like to give a disclaimer for this presentation. The information contained in this presentation does not constitute a proof. I'm coming right out in the open and saying that. Nor was it my intention to attempt to provide a proof here today. Okay? Proof of anything of such magnitude or covering all aspects of such topics could not possibly be accomplished within the limited confines of a 2-hour presentation. Also, please recognize that I am not attempting to convince anyone to accept or believe anything contained in this presentation. I am asking those here today and watching on video, those with an open mind, to seriously consider this explanatory model by asking questions and researching these topics for yourself, because that's the only way we're going to come to the truth about anything. This is my third foray into the field of ufology in the form of a formal presentation. The first two that I gave this back in 2010. It was called Don't Count on Disclosure, and I went through all the reasons why not to expect disclosure from any kind of official channels. The second presentation was called Morality and Disclosure, and it involved the moral issues that are central to the ongoing cover-up of extraterrestrial intelligence and the UFO phenomenon in general. So this is my third active foray into ufology. I'm going to give it in 3 basic parts, 3 sections, an introduction, and then three parts. Okay, so this is the introduction. It's called Starting from Where We Were Left Off, and you'll understand what I mean by this as we go on. But when I say starting from where we left off, I mean this is actually a continuation of my work that I've done in other areas, like in What on Earth is Happening podcast series, on my radio shows, the interviews that I do on other people's shows, my video presentations, etc. I always give this caveat at the beginning of all my presentations. There's 5 essential boxes for human consciousness. There's 5 things that shut human consciousness down. 5 models that attempt to keep people rigidly inside of their walls, okay? And if you're inside these boxes, you're not going to expand your awareness to understand the actual truth of what's going on in our world. And those 5 boxes are politics, okay? So if anybody identifies with left or right, conservative, Republican, liberal, Democrat, etc., going to be sorely disappointed with this presentation. Religion in general, and by this I mean the cultural religions of the world. Scientism, not what I call real science, but what I call ultra-rigid skepticism in the form of quote-unquote science that's peddled for modern science in today's world. And of course the New Age movement, which I've done a lot of recent exposure of. The 5th one is the monetary system in general. The general belief in money, period. So if anybody's coming at their looking at the world, their whole paradigm or worldview from any one of these boxes, good luck, because you're already putting yourself in a limited confines, and I don't think, many people who are looking at reality from one of these 5 perspectives is going to take a whole lot away from this presentation, because it's coming at it from a closed-minded perspective to begin with. And again, I would recommend not trying to filter this presentation through any one of these boxes. If you do, you're not going to get much value out of it. What I highly recommend is to try to shed these as much as possible to the extent that any of you here today or watching on video are in these boxes. And to really do that, what you're really saying is, I'm not going to stay in my comfort zone. I'm actually going to search for the truth that lies beneath. Okay? That's not really contained in any of those, that goes way beyond any of those 5 boxes. All right? So, with that in mind, starting from where we left off, my other work really covers that the current human condition is slavery. Okay? When people ask me what my work is about, I tell them it's about slavery and how to end it. Okay? Slavery and how to end it. And that usually gets people's attention. That perks them up a little bit and, puts them in a mode that, they can understand where I'm coming from usually. And for people who don't understand this is the case of the world, they're also going to find this presentation difficult. All right? So a kind of a second disclaimer. For those who do not already deeply understand that the current human condition is slavery, and I'm starting with that as matter of fact. I'm not asking anyone to believe that. I'm telling you it's true. I'm stating it factually. That's the case. Okay? I fully recognize that at this point in time, if you don't understand our condition is slavery, you may not even be able to consider with an open mind much of the information in this presentation due to a lack of prerequisite knowledge. Meaning, if you don't understand that, I'm telling people up front, you haven't done your homework, and you don't understand where we're at right now. So therefore, hearing what I'm about to say, this is like the advanced class, let's put it that way, okay? So if people don't already understand this, it's going to be very difficult to hear what I'm going to say here today, all right? For those who haven't come to that understanding, this is a great site. This is my website. Go up to this site, listen to the podcasts in order, and your entire paradigm will shift if you have an open mind. If you could take that information in with an open mind and an open heart, and do your own due diligence, I think you'll start to understand the big picture of what's going on this planet. So check out whatonearthishappening.com. In whatonearthishappening.com, the main question that I have delved into up to this point is, why is this the current human condition? Why is the current human condition slavery? Trying to get at the underlying causal factors that have led to the condition that we are in now. Okay? So all my previous work has dealt with that question. Why are we in a condition of slavery? All right? And the answer to that is provided on that site. Now, what I'm going to do here is go even beyond that question here today. But I want to just summarize briefly, as quickly as it can be summarized. I'm going to attempt to summarize the answer to that question in basically 4 short sentences or 5 sentences, okay? The reason that humanity is enslaved is it does not understand natural law. It does not understand the spiritual laws that govern the universe, okay? And I call this natural law, this body of laws that ultimately govern behavior. I group it under this umbrella term, natural law, okay? Here's what natural law essentially is. Natural law is the body of universal, non-man-made, binding, and immutable laws which act as the governing dynamics for the consequences of human behavior. Now, that's a lot to say there in one breath. I say it's non-man-made laws that already exist in creation that ultimately act as the governing dynamics for the behaviors that we choose to enact. All right? That's what natural law is. Now, humanity doesn't understand natural law in the aggregate. There are individuals who do, but the aggregate body of humanity is completely ignorant of natural law. It's why we're enslaved. Understanding natural law, what is meant by that? It means truly having conscience, which is the definitive knowledge of the objective difference between morally right behavior and morally wrong behavior. That is what it means to understand natural law. Okay? Living in harmony with natural law, okay, is different than understanding it. One can even understand it and not actually accept it and enact it and live in harmony with it. Living in harmony with it means exercising one's conscience, or in other words, willfully choosing morally right behavior over morally wrong behavior, once that difference is clearly understood. When human beings, in the aggregate, the species, lives in harmony with natural law, and are therefore moral, again in the aggregate, it doesn't mean just the individual. When the aggregate of the species lives in harmony with natural law and therefore exhibit moral behavior, they become and remain free. When human beings live in opposition to natural law and are therefore immoral, they become and remain enslaved. That's how the dynamic of freedom versus slavery works, and this is what I call the law of freedom. That is the law of freedom. It has everything to do with morality and is totally, inextricably connected with morality and can never be separated from it. Okay? That's natural law in a nutshell, and about as quickly as it can be, condensed. I also talk about this concept, the one true divide, that there is only one true divide that separates humanity into two distinct types of individuals. The criterion for this divide is whether or not an individual believes in authority and therefore believes that there is legitimacy to slavery. Someone who believes in authority believes that there is legitimacy to slavery. Again, I'm not asking anyone to believe this. I'm telling you that's the fact of the matter. That is the reality. Okay? And this is where my other work leaves off, explaining that this is the divide that needs to be bridged. All the other things that allegedly separate humanity, race, class, sex, religion, all this, they're all divide and conquer strategies. This is the real divide, where there really is two groups of actual different kinds of people on the earth. That's the real divide, and that's the criterion that separates them, whether they believe in authority vested in human beings. These are the two groups of people that embody the divide. Okay? These are memes that I put in another presentation of mine. The statists and the anarchists. Okay? The statists, exemplified by a police officer, with this meme saying, statism is the brilliant idea that we give a small group of people the right to kidnap, imprison, harass, steal from, and kill people so that we can be protected from people who kidnap, harass, steal, and kill people. Okay? And the meme that I found, this great meme with the anarchists represented by, the archetypal figure of Jesus, saying that I'm an anarchist, but most of my followers are statists, meaning I don't believe in slavery, yet most of my followers do. So really what we're really talking about, these are euphemisms, okay? These are just euphemisms, words that we use as euphemisms. This is what it really means. This is the real meaning. This is someone who supports slavery, and this is someone who opposes slavery. That's all it really comes down to. Those are the two kinds of people in the world. The supporters of slavery, whether they understand that that's the case or not, and those who oppose slavery in all of its forms, in which case I am. I oppose slavery in all of its forms. Okay? What this presentation is going to be about is what happened, okay, such that we do not understand natural law. Why are we in the mental state or the condition that people do not have a fundamental grasp of that truth that I just put up there? And I'm not telling you, again, it's true because I believe it. I'm telling you it's true because that is the universal law of creation. And all anybody can ever do is discover it or not understand it. It is there, and what I just stated is true. Okay? So, what we're going to look at here today is why are most people so unconscious that they don't understand that? Okay? Why do they refuse to live in harmony with natural law? They refuse to understand natural law. Why are they so unconscious that they fail to recognize the rampant presence of evil in the modern day, in their midst, all around them, and they just ignore it? Why are they so unconscious that they will willfully participate in such evil, either directly or indirectly? Okay? And this is where my other presentations have left off. And I've been very tight-lipped about the things I'm going to talk about here today so far. Okay, because this has all been preparing the way for this understanding of the 6 years of work that I've been doing over the last 6 years. That's a long time to stay tight-lipped about something too. Okay, so my other work has left off with this understanding. I'm sorry, I accidentally backed up the slide here. Let me just move this forward again. I apologize for that. this whole psychological framework, this model that I've built up in my other work, I've termed the reasons why we're in this condition, the tree of evil. Okay, that's what this right side of this slide represents. Okay, now you have to envision this model. At the top of the model, at the top of this tree of evil, there's all the leaves and the twigs. Okay, and these are the fruits. These are the expressions that happen after the fact. Okay, and the top expression is willful ignorance. People refusing to look into the truth for themselves, willfully staying ignorant. Okay? Now people will say, well, isn't that the root? Isn't that the root cause? No. That's the expression that follows the root cause. Well, what lies beneath that? What's the bigger branches of this tree of evil? Beneath willful ignorance, people have a fundamental fear of owning their own personal responsibility. We don't want to be truly responsible for our own behavior. We want to pass the buck. We want to pass responsibility on to others and say, no, this isn't us doing this to ourselves. It isn't our responsibility. It's someone else's responsibility. Okay? So the fear of owning personal responsibility goes deeper in the psychological framework for why people are willfully ignorant. Now, something underlies that. There's a reason people have fear of owning their own personal responsibility. Okay? And that is what I would call the trunk of the tree of evil. The trunk of the tree is self-loathing. Humanity is a species that hates itself, ultimately. Deep, deep, deep down inside, nested into the deep underneath of the subconscious mind, we are a self-loathing species. Okay? And that's due to a lack of self-respect. We don't have self-respect because we don't have enough understanding of self. We don't have self-knowledge. We don't have enough understanding of consciousness. Now, what we're going to talk about here today is what is the root of the tree of evil. At the very bottom of this psychological framework, something underlies all of this. A question, and again, I've asked people, please hold your questions till the end, and we will adjourn to the beer garden on South Street, Brauhaus, to take questions and have more discussion. But I will occasionally ask the audience a question, okay? Can anyone please tell me what general group of people this psychological framework is typical of? In general, there is a class of human beings that display just being ignorant, fearing to own their own personal responsibility, and lacking a lot of self-respect for themselves because they don't really know a lot about themselves yet. Children. Thank you, sir. Children. This exemplifies someone who is not psychologically mature, okay? Who has not psychologically and spiritually grown up, okay? So this is the group that we're really talking about. We're not talking about actual children. Again, we're talking about psychological children, spiritual children. Questions at the end, please, okay? Now, what kind of children display these particular symptoms psychologically, if you will? Okay, now, actually, that's a good answer, because I would say that gangsters and wannabe gangsters exemplify this psychological issue that I'm going to be talking about. The answer here is abandonment issues. Parental abandonment issues. People who have in some form or another been let down or completely abandoned by the parental figures in their lives. And I would suggest everybody in this room and everybody watching has abandonment issues in some form or fashion or another, whether they even want to admit it or not. On my podcast in the future, I'll be talking about my own abandonment issues because I had them. If you had them, you have them. And it means you're either dealing with them and you're healing them or you're not. Okay? And largely what this presentation is going to be about is those who are not dealing with them and not healing them. Okay? So we're going to get deeply into what that is all about. People here today coming from the UFO area, as this is the Philadelphia UFO meetup group, will say, well, what in the God's name does this have to do, foreshadowing there, have to do with these guys? What does this have to do with the entire UFO phenomenon? You know, what could all these psychological issues he's talking about possibly have to do with UFOs? Well, I'm going to tell you here today, it has everything to do with this phenomenon. Regardless of what you think that phenomenon is, okay? And I'm not going to get into all the details about necessarily specifically what it is and get into the debates. Oh, is it extra-dimensional? Is it demonic? Is it extraterrestrial? Okay? But we're talking about the effect upon the human psyche that the involvement of these beings, whatever their nature may be, has had upon humanity. Okay? The questions that I'm going to explore in this presentation are as follows. Why are there so many ancient accounts of extraterrestrial visitation to our planet, all so similar in the events they describe, yet all of them are just readily dismissed by modern academia as merely fantasy and myth? And I'm going to suggest, no, they are not fantasy and myth, they are historical accounts. We just don't want to admit that they're historical accounts because of the implications that that would bring up for humanity. Okay? Are human beings actually the progeny of an extraterrestrial species that came forth to Earth, came to the Earth millennia ago, as some ancient historical accounts suggest? Were human beings created by extraterrestrial entities as a hybrid slave species for unknown purposes related to an alien agenda? Other questions to be explored. Did our extraterrestrial parents inadvertently create a host of genetic defects in the human genome, in our species, including primary psychopathy, as a direct result of the imprecise genetic modification techniques they employed? Did our extraterrestrial forebears provide to us our systems of government, money, and religion? And to what ends did they do so? What ends did they provide these systems to us for? What effect did our cosmic parents' quote-unquote disappearance have upon the collective human psyche? And how significant are all these events to understanding the current psychological conditions in which humanity currently exists? What does humanity need to understand to rectify the deeply seated psychological trauma that it has accumulated over millennia as a direct result of its, quote, troubled childhood? These are the questions to be explored. Part 1, the story of